The dart left my hand before she even turned around, and that is when I knew something was wrong, because she should have been on the ground already, and instead she was still standing there, chewing a piece of fruit like nothing in the galaxy could touch her. My name does not matter to this story. What matters is what I am. I am a hunter from the Velkari Guild, and in 300 years my guild has never failed a single contract. We do not miss. We do not hesitate. We do not walk away from a job once we accept it. That reputation is worth more than gold on 100 worlds, and I had built my whole life around keeping it clean. So when the contract came through for a human girl on the trade station Havorn, I almost laughed. The file said she was 17 years old. It said she was unarmed. It said the threat level was low. The payment offered was so high that I checked the numbers twice, thinking someone had made a mistake. Nobody pays that much for a low-threat target, but greed makes fools of even careful people, and I told myself the client simply wanted her gone quietly, without questions, without a mess. Rich people pay strange amounts for strange reasons. I did not ask why. I took the job. Her name was Myra Ashworth. That was the only detail in the file that felt real, a small human name sitting inside a folder full of numbers and coordinates. I studied her movements for 2 days before I made my approach. She worked at a fruit stall in the lower market of the station, laughing with customers, carrying crates that looked too heavy for someone her size, walking through crowds like she belonged in them completely. Nothing about her looked dangerous. Nothing about her looked like a reason for someone to pay a fortune for her death. I told myself that was exactly why the job would be easy. On the 3rd day, I made my move. I chose a narrow walkway near the market entrance, a place with no cameras and only one way in or out. I carried a neurotoxin dart, the kind my guild has used for 2 centuries, silent, painless, completely reliable. It has never failed, not once. I raised my hand, aimed for the side of her neck, and released it. She caught it. Not dodged it, not blocked it by accident. She reached up without even looking in my direction and closed her fingers around the dart in the air, the same way a person might catch a fly out of habit. Then she looked at it, turned it over in her fingers, and dropped it into a trash bin beside the stall without breaking her conversation with the customer in front of her. I stood frozen behind a support pillar, watching a 17-year-old girl casually throw away a weapon that could stop the heart of a full-grown Velkari warrior in under 4 seconds. She had not even flinched. I retreated. My hands were shaking, which had never happened to me before in 3 centuries of work. I told myself it was a fluke, a lucky reflex, nothing more. But my training told me otherwise. Reflexes that fast are not luck. They are built. They are earned through survival, through repeated exposure to danger so extreme that the body learns to react before the mind even understands the threat. I went back to the file. This time I read past the summary, past the easy numbers, and into the deeper records that most hunters skip because deep records take time and time is money. What I found made my chest feel tight in a way it had not felt since my first solo contract, back when I was young and still afraid of failure. Myra Ashworth was born on a planet called Cassandra, one of the 17 confirmed Deathworlds in known space. Deathworlds are places where gravity crushes bone, where the air itself carries poisons in every breath, where the wildlife evolved not to survive but to dominate everything smaller and softer than itself. Most species who visit Deathworlds die within hours. The humans who live there are born into it, raised in it, shaped by it from the moment they take their first breath. The file listed 3 previous assassination attempts against her before the age of 10. All 3 failed, not because of luck, because the girl had been trained from early childhood to recognize danger the way other children learn to recognize colors. Her body had adapted to poisons that would stop a Velkari heart in seconds. Her reflexes moved faster than most sensors could track, and none of it was augmentation. None of it was cybernetic enhancement or genetic tampering. It was simply what a human child from Cassandra became, if that child survived long enough to grow up. I sat in my rented room above the station's engineering deck and stared at the wall for a long time. Somewhere in that stare, I understood the truth of the contract. Nobody had hired me to kill a helpless girl. Somebody had hired me to walk into a trap and paid me well enough that I would not think to ask questions before I did it. I should have walked away right then. Any sensible hunter would have cut their losses and left the station on the next transport. But my guild had never failed a contract, and some foolish, stubborn part of me refused to be the first. So I stayed, and I tried again, and that decision cost me almost everything. My second attempt came 2 nights later. I used a different method this time, a compressed air weapon that fired a small metal fragment at a speed no human eye should have been able to track. I fired from a rooftop across the market square, more than 200 meters away, in complete darkness, with no line of sight she could reasonably have anticipated. She stepped sideways exactly half a second before the shot landed, as if she had heard something the rest of the world could not hear. The fragment struck the wall behind where she had been standing and left a small crater in the metal plating. She did not run. She did not call for security. She simply looked up toward the rooftop, directly at the spot where I was hidden, and raised one hand in what looked disturbingly like a small wave. I left the rooftop so fast, I nearly fell down the maintenance ladder. That night I contacted my guild's communication channel, the private frequency we use to report on difficult contracts. I expected sympathy, or at least professional advice. What I got instead was silence, followed by a strange, careful response from a senior handler named Corwin Blake, a man I had worked with for over a decade. He told me 4 other hunters had taken contracts on the same girl over the past 2 months. All 4 had reported in after their first attempt. None of them had reported in since. Their tracking beacons still showed active signals, still moving, still functioning, still very much alive. They simply were not answering calls anymore. I asked him what he thought had happened to them. He said he did not know, and that troubled me more than any answer could have, because Corwin Blake always knows something. He has contacts on every station in this sector. For him to admit ignorance meant the situation had grown beyond what our guild's usual channels could explain. I decided to investigate before making a third attempt, which was against everything I had been trained to do. A hunter does not gather intelligence on a target after 2 failures. A hunter withdraws, reports failure, and lets the guild reassign the contract. But something about this job had already pulled me too deep to walk away with my pride intact, and pride, I would learn, is a very expensive thing to protect. I found one of the missing hunters on the lower deck of the station, in a small workshop tucked between a repair garage and a supply depot. His name, according to guild records, was Talvin Ashgrove, a hunter from a species known for patience and precision, not for making mistakes. I watched him through the workshop window for almost an hour before I understood what I was seeing. He was not a prisoner. He was working. He was calibrating some kind of sensor array on a workbench, focused and calm, occasionally speaking with someone off to the side that I could not see from my angle. There were no restraints. There was no fear in his posture. If anything, he looked more relaxed than I had ever seen a hunter look while working. I waited until he stepped outside for a break and approached him directly, keeping my hands visible, my voice low. He recognized me immediately as another hunter, which was not surprising since our kind can usually sense each other even in disguise. He did not seem alarmed. He seemed almost amused. I asked him what had happened. I asked him why he had not reported back to the guild. I asked him if he was being held against his will. He laughed quietly and told me the truth was much simpler and much stranger than anything I had imagined. He said he had taken the contract just like I had, tracked her just like I had, and made his attempt just like I had. And just like me, his attempt had failed completely. But instead of retreating and trying again, he told me the girl had approached him afterward, not with a weapon, not with security forces. She had simply walked up to him in a quiet corridor, sat down across from him, and asked him a question that no target had ever asked an assassin before. She asked him why. Not in anger, not in fear. She asked him, calmly and directly, why someone would pay so much money to end the life of a teenage girl who had never harmed anyone on the station, who worked an honest job, who had never once used her strength or her speed against another living person unless her own life was threatened first. Talvin told me he did not have a good answer, because the truth was he did not know why either. He had simply taken a job that paid well, the way hunters always do, without asking the deeper questions. She had told him that if he wanted to know the real reason behind the contract, she could help him find out, not through violence, through work, through investigation. She told him she had been targeted before, many times, and every time the trail led back to people who profited from chaos on trade routes like this one, people who used contracts on visible targets to distract from larger crimes happening in the shadows of the station. Talvin had agreed to help her look into it, thinking it would take a day or two before he moved on to his next contract. That had been 6 weeks ago. He had not left since, not because he was trapped, but because what he had found in that investigation had changed how he understood the entire situation. I asked him where the other 3 missing hunters were. He told me they were scattered across the station, each pursuing a different thread of the same investigation, each one finding pieces of a puzzle that connected corrupt station officials, smuggled cargo, and a pattern of assassination contracts placed on anyone who threatened to expose the smuggling operation. Myra Ashworth had stumbled onto part of that operation months earlier, while delivering fruit crates to a warehouse she was not supposed to see inside of. The people running the smuggling ring had placed a bounty on her not because she was dangerous in the way a soldier is dangerous, but because she had seen something she was never meant to see, and because a girl from a Deathworld was nearly impossible to remove through normal means. Every hunter who failed to kill her became, in a strange way, a witness to how deep the corruption really ran. And every hunter who investigated further found themselves unable to simply walk away once they understood what they were looking at. I did not believe him at first. 300 years of guild training does not disappear because of one conversation in a supply corridor. I told him I still intended to complete my contract, because a Velkari hunter does not fail, and because I had already spent 2 attempts and could not afford to return home empty-handed. He did not argue with me. He simply told me to go find her myself and ask her the same question he had asked. He said she would give me the same chance she had given him. I found her that evening at the fruit stall, closing up for the night, stacking empty crates by herself in the quiet market. I approached from the front this time, no weapon drawn, no cover, nothing hidden. If she was going to end my career here, I decided I would at least look her in the eyes when it happened. She noticed me before I said a word, of course, and set down the crate she was holding with the calm patience of someone who had done this exact conversation many times before. She looked at me for a long moment, studying my face the way I had studied hers through a scope only nights earlier, and then she asked if I wanted to sit down. I told her I was the 3rd hunter to fail against her. She corrected me gently, telling me I was actually the 5th, and that the count did not particularly bother her anymore. I asked her directly why she had not simply had me removed after my 2nd attempt, since clearly she had the strength and the speed to do so without effort. She told me something I have carried with me every day since. She said that killing the hunters sent after her would only convince whoever hired them to send stronger ones next time, and that violence answered with violence rarely ends anything. It only escalates it. Instead, she told me, every hunter she convinced to look closer at the truth became someone the corrupt officials could no longer use against her, and eventually someone who could help expose the entire operation from the inside. I told her that sounded like a very dangerous strategy for a 17-year-old girl working alone. She smiled at that, and told me she was not working alone anymore, not for weeks now, and gestured toward the market around us, where I noticed for the first time several familiar faces among the evening crowd. Hunters I recognized from guild records, dressed as ordinary station workers, watching quietly, blending into the background like they had always belonged there. I sat down across from her, finally, and asked the question I had been avoiding since my first failed attempt. I asked her who had actually placed the contract, and why they wanted her gone badly enough to pay a fortune for it. She told me the truth plainly, without drama, the way someone explains a simple fact they have already made peace with. The contract had been placed by a station administrator named Halden Cross, a man who controlled cargo inspection routes, and had spent years quietly allowing smuggled goods to pass through in exchange for payments that never appeared in any official record. Myra had seen one of his private meetings by accident, delivering fruit to the wrong warehouse door on a delivery run months earlier. She had not even understood what she was looking at until later, when the first hunter arrived less than a week after that delivery. She told me Halden Cross believed a scared teenage girl would either run or be silenced quickly and quietly, ending the problem before anyone noticed. He had never imagined that a Cassandran Deathworld upbringing had prepared her for exactly this kind of threat, and he certainly never imagined that the hunters he hired would end up working alongside her instead of against her. I sat there for a long moment, letting the weight of it settle. My guild's unbroken record of successful contracts suddenly felt small and foolish compared to what was actually happening here. I had spent 300 years' worth of tradition chasing a payment placed by a corrupt man trying to protect a smuggling operation, and I had almost helped him succeed. I asked her what she needed from me. She told me the investigation needed someone with tracking skills to follow the cargo shipments through their final destination points, something my training made me uniquely suited for. She was not asking me to fight for her. She was asking me to help finish uncovering the truth, the same way the other hunters had chosen to do. I thought about my guild, about the report I would eventually have to file, about the unbroken record that would finally break with my name attached to it. Then I thought about Talvin Ashgrove, calm and unafraid in that workshop, doing work that mattered instead of chasing payments that did not. I told her I would help. Over the following weeks, I worked alongside 4 other hunters, all of us former contract holders on the same girl, all of us slowly piecing together shipping records, cargo manifests, and payment trails that led directly back to Halden Cross and 2 other officials working with him. Myra was there for much of it, not hiding in safety somewhere while others did the dangerous work, but moving through the station openly, gathering information from people who trusted her because they had known her for years, people who would never have spoken so freely to a hunter or an investigator. What struck me most as the weeks passed was how ordinary she remained through all of it. She still worked her shifts at the fruit stall. She still laughed with customers and carried crates that looked too heavy for her frame. The extraordinary strength and speed that had stopped 5 separate assassination attempts lived quietly inside an otherwise gentle life, used only when necessary, never for show, never for cruelty. When the evidence was finally complete, station security arrived at Halden Cross's private office with enough documentation to end his career and the smuggling operation completely. I was not present for that final moment. None of the hunters were. Myra had insisted the arrest happen through proper station authority, not through people like us, because she wanted the resolution to mean something official, something that could not be dismissed later as the actions of outside hunters settling a personal score. I asked her once, near the end of it all, whether she had ever been afraid during those weeks when hunters kept arriving to end her life. She told me the honest truth, which was that she had been afraid every single time, because fear does not disappear just because a person grew up in a hard place. What she had learned on Cassandra was not the absence of fear. It was how to keep working through it, how to keep making the next right choice even while afraid, until the fear became something manageable instead of something paralyzing. I still think about that answer more than I think about almost anything else from my 300 years of service. I did eventually report back to my guild, and I told them plainly that the contract on Myra Ashworth had been fraudulent, placed by a criminal to silence an accidental witness, and that continuing to send hunters after her would only implicate the guild in an active corruption case now under station investigation. It was not the outcome my superiors wanted to hear, but it was the truth, and for the first time in a long career, I found I did not mind disappointing them. These days I still take contracts, but I choose them differently now. I look past the numbers on the payment line and into the deeper files most hunters skip. I ask why a job pays too well for what it claims to be. And whenever a new hunter arrives on the station chasing a bounty on a girl who runs a fruit stall in the lower market, I find them before their first attempt if I can, and I tell them exactly what Talvin Ashgrove once told me. She is not the target. She never really was. She is the reason 5 hunters stopped chasing contracts and started asking better questions, and if you are wise, you will let her ask you one too, before you make a mistake that costs you far more than a failed job ever could.